President of the Chamber. Really happy to have this panel here and all of you watching. One more reminder, just to say hello, tell us who you are. Select all panelists and attendees in chat so we know a little bit about who our audience is. I'm really excited about this program. As many people know, we have been expanding our attention and focus into Wellesley as of the beginning of this calendar year. The response has been great. And we're really just beginning to understand some of the issues and challenges facing our businesses and our nonprofits in Wellesley. And I think today is a start of many conversations we want to have with business owners, with nonprofits, and with the residents and elected officials in town to talk about those things. Today, we're going to specifically talk about the restaurant business. We will focus in a little while on Article 21, which is something that's going to go before town meeting at the end of April. But I wanted to just begin with a general conversation, and I'll introduce our panelists as we bring them in, about the restaurant business itself, what this year has meant to restaurants, and where we think we're going from here. And so what I'd like to do is I'm going to start with Jay Spencer, who is chair of the Chamber's Restaurant Committee, and also a vice chair of the Chamber's Board of Directors. But more significantly, he's the owner and the culinary director of the French Press and Bakery Cafe in Needham. He, before that, ran and operated a full-service restaurant called Petit Robert Bistro in Needham. And he's worked in finance and business circles in a lot of ways, including at JP Morgan, GE, and other places. So, Jay, I wanted to start with you. Tell us what's on restaurant owners' minds this year. What is this? How are they looking and thinking about the spring after a year that we know is so difficult?
Sure. So good morning, everyone, and welcome. Greg, I think the most difficult thing that we're thinking about right now is, in many cases, how do we restart? A lot of the restaurants were in a condition where they either had to hibernate / pause, if you will, or look at other ways to change their business model. As we look at where we're going right now, the key in terms of kind of shifting our focus is outdoor dining and moving away from takeout, which has practically been 100% of our business, to now going into indoor dining. What you have to look at least what a lot of our restaurateurs in the collaborative are concerned about, is how do you get people back in the seats? And more importantly, what are you offering? So, a lot of our menus were streamlined, that we were strictly focused on takeout. And, in many cases, the volume wasn't there. So that's why you may see a lot of restaurants closed on Sunday, Monday, or Tuesday. So we've got to shift gears in order to not only regroup in terms of what we're doing from a conceptual perspective, but also to be able to deliver innovation and customer service that people have come to learn and love with restaurants, for them to be the gathering spaces that they once were.
And has this year been particularly tough for certain kinds of restaurants? Is it, has everything been really just tough for everybody?
Well, if we talk about restaurants, I think it's important to have a distinction between limited service restaurants and full service restaurants. Limited service restaurants are going to be things that are quick service, fast casual, coffees and snacks. The full service are going to be, your fine dining, your casual dining, and your family dining. The limited service restaurants, although they've had a difficult time, it has not been as severe, if you will, as full service restaurants, because they had a takeout model in place and they were able to adapt a lot quicker than some of the full service restaurants. Full service restaurants have either said that they can adapt to that model of a takeout, and they've either closed temporarily or are now coming back online, or they're looking at how they re-emerge and present a product to the public that's consistent with what they originally opened up with. So, I definitely see that limited service restaurants are on the rebound. Sales are down across the board for almost everybody, but they're hardest hit in the full service area. And that's going to be the area of concern for a lot of folks going forward.
Right, Jay, thank you. So next up, I want to introduce somebody. What I love about this job is I get to meet people that maybe I've enjoyed their food or experienced what they've done for many years, but didn't even know, hadn't met them before. And today I'm meeting Jeremy Sewell, who lives in Wellesley with his wife, Lisa. They've been there for about 12 years. And Jeremy's done a lot of restaurants in and out of the greater Boston area, including Lineage Restaurant in Brookline, for 10 years, and he's currently the chef and co-owner at Row 34 and Island Creek Oyster Bar. So he doesn't have a presence in Wellesley, but except that he eats here or wants to eat here. So Jeremy, can you tell us a little bit about kind of what you're seeing for the kind of restaurant business overall and throughout Greater Boston?
Sure. Yeah. It's been an unbelievable year, of course, without saying. I think that, all restaurants have kind of had a moment to kind of look inward and understand and realize that this is really a business. I think that, the barriers to entry for the restaurant business are so few for a lot of people. And that's what attracts a lot of, walks of life and cultures and people from all over to this industry. You can kind of, it can be a very personal thing. You can kind of represent what you want to do or the style of food that you like to cook. And hopefully there's an audience for that. I think for us now in the industry, you're realizing, well, it's a business, and if you don't take running your business very seriously, you're in deep trouble. So what I've seen all over the state is struggling. I think you're going to see continued closures for the next 12 to 18 months. I mean, I think the government assistance has been great and needed. I don't think it's going to necessarily save all the restaurants. I think it's going to prolong the death for some. So I think as we kind of relook at our business models and how we're doing things, unfortunately, I think it's going to create a lack of diversity in this industry for a little while that hopefully will return. I think people are, going to be less willing to take a chance on opening something that's different or unique. I think that people are going to try to stay, not everyone, but more down the middle of what they feel is going to be, businessly viable rather than, what has made this industry so interesting and strong for so many years is, and, when I was a young man and opened my first restaurant on my own, I was, if I knew now what I knew then, I certainly wouldn't have done it, but we survived for a long time through trial and error. But it's an industry that was not, as most were, not ready for what has happened to us over these last 12 months. So I think you're going to see a lot of people really focus on running their business as a business over the next few years.
And Jeremy, are you seeing people starting to feel more comfortable coming indoors to eat, and especially in the full service restaurants?
Yes and no. I think, the success of opening this spring for indoor dining is really going to be consumer confidence. And I don't know that there is every day it seems like there's a little bit of great news happening, which is wonderful. Restaurant employees are towards the front of the line for vaccinations, which we found out in the last day or so, which is wonderful. But is there going to be enough people to go out and eat in restaurants to have all these restaurants survive for the next 6, 12, 18 months? Tourism in Boston is a big part of our industry. That's not going to come back the way it was. So it's going to be, we need people to feel confident in going out, and how long that takes for that to come back, I think remains to be seen.
Great, thanks for being here this morning. And up next, we can't really talk about restaurants without also talking about the other part of the critical part of this equation, especially for the second part of our conversation, which is the owners of these buildings. And we have with us Angela Van Arsdale, who is the director of retail leasing at Graffito. She's been a leasing broker for many years. And in Angela's role, she's worked with both landlords and tenants. And this has been tough on restaurants. It also means it's been tough and challenging for tenants. And I'm hoping you could just kind of tell us kind of where it's all fits together and how landlords are feeling, how restaurants are thinking about negotiating or what they've had to do in the past year.
Sure. Thanks, Greg. Good morning, everyone. Yeah, I mean, just to echo what everyone's been saying, it's going to be a long road to recovery here. Restaurants have been thrown everything, all the curveballs, made all the pivots, had to stay flexible. And to Jay's point, the full service restaurants particularly are hardest hit. They've all had to see if they can add some outdoor seating, add the takeout delivery component to their model if that didn't exist prior. They've gotten creative with putting together meal kits and cocktail kits and being able to sell liquor in certain areas without the food component as well, which really helped buoy their sales. And even, reworking their layout internally to accommodate for a bigger back of house to meet the demand of the takeout delivery factor. new cleaning protocols, and then ongoing conversations with their landlords. It's been difficult across the board, and some landlords have more flexibility than others. But it's really, you see who sort of has that healthy partnership with their landlords and who doesn't. But overall, we've seen a really great response from the landlords that we've worked with throughout Greater Boston, really digging into what can be done, how can we partner, how can we get you through this, what else sort of beyond restructuring your lease can we do? Can we work with the city to, see if we can create more outdoor space for seating, help you sort of rework your layout, get some heaters, all of those things have certainly helped. And in some cases, all of those things, were still not enough. And a lot of these restaurants had to go into hibernation. So that was another conversation that had to be had with landlords as well. So in looking forward, I think the ramp up is going to be slow. I think people's comfort level in terms of coming back to restaurants and dining and having those experiences indoors will also be slow, even with the vaccine news. So I think, there's going to be challenges still to come. A lot of operators have also lost staff due to hibernation and just, the overall environment. So staffing is another challenge that we're seeing. Cost of goods is another challenge. So while the government assistance and stimulus and employees being able to now get vaccines is all well and good, it's still going to take, quite some time to sort of get to where we were, but also, replenish what was lost over the past year.
Yeah, it seems really interesting to me that restaurant owners have to be good at three things right now, whereas they used to have to be good at one. They have to be good at either their dine-in operation or their takeout operation, which may be in a setup that wasn't really designed for it, that they've had to put together, and then good at takeout. And that's a lot to ask those folks to do in the middle of trying to maintain protocols and safety and limited staff and everything. So let's talk about what this all means a little bit more in Wellesley. Laura Wolf is the owner of the Cottage and also the just opened Wellesley Tavern. She grew up in Wellesley. She's third generation in her family to have a business in Wellesley. The Cottage has been open since 2007. The Tavern's been open for 2 weeks. It was previously door number 7, which she also ran with her husband. I know she has restaurants in Newburyport and has had them elsewhere. But I'm going to just start, Laura. Have your friends told you you're crazy to try to open a restaurant right now?
Yeah, people keep looking at us sideways, like, really now? But we felt like we had to continue with the space at door number 7, and realized that when COVID hit, that sort of upper end dining was probably not going to happen. I think people wanted comfort food, and we needed something that was going to appeal to more people in Wellesley. So I think the right thing for us to do is to pivot, and luckily we were able to pivot and to rebrand ourselves and start with a new concept to see if we still have some life there. And the first week or two have been great. So we're so appreciative of everybody that has given us a try. It's hard to get people in the doors right now, as everybody's been saying. We're thankful to be, giving it a try. I think Wellesley still has a lot to offer in the dining scene. But I just want to comment, I agree with what everybody's been saying, but what Jeremy said is, this thing isn't over. It's still another 12 to 18 months for us. And even though we've had government assistance, all of us have still had to go, into our pockets, hard and deep to, reconfigure our dining rooms, bring in different types of furniture, glass panels, whatever it is to make it work. And it's going to take us a while to dig out. This isn't over. As everyone was saying, this isn't over yet. Even if consumer confidence returns, I still think we have a little bit of a long haul in front of us.
And Laura, can you explain that the Cottage was closed for much of the year or for takeout only? What's happening there now?
Yeah, so the Cottage reopened to have people come in, I think around March 1st. We did close. We did have a COVID outbreak in the kitchen, and that happened about the middle of December. And we just felt, you know what, it's just not worth it. So we decided to close for the 14 days. And then we were going into January, February, which are notoriously really, really quiet months in the restaurant industry anyways. And then with COVID on top of it, we just felt it wasn't worth us, remaining open just for takeout. And even though people see people coming through the door, there's still the lights on, there's still people in the kitchen, there's still, the rents that have to be paid. So, and it's just sort of a matter of going deeper into debt, staying open for a losing proposition. So we made the decision to hibernate for a couple of months until the weather turned, until there were vaccines out there, until people felt a little bit more comfortable coming back. So that's why we closed for a couple of months. At times we've questioned our decision because not everybody did close, and we thought, are we seeing this wrong? But I think we're happy with what we did because we're not as far in the hole as I would think maybe other people are, but that's just, my opinion. And I don't know everybody else's financial situation, but it's tough.
Yeah, great. So one more person, operator that I want to bring in here, and this is, now we have somebody who's really got their ear close to the street in Wellesley. Brad Wasik, who many people obviously in Wellesley know, him and his family operate Wasiks Cheese Shop on Central Street. His family's owned it for 42 years and 2 generations. And Brad, you don't have a restaurant now, but we'll get to a little bit more about what you might be thinking about there in the next section. But tell me, what's it like on what kind of streets of Central Street and in general, foot traffic, people, customers, how people are feeling and what are you seeing?
Yeah, thank you for having me. To be honest with you, we've been there for 42 years. I pretty much grew up on the street and I don't remember so many vacancies. And part of that is because of COVID, obviously that's a huge hit, but also the rents and things like that. And so, the early days of COVID, it was crazy. There was no cars on the street whatsoever. It was a little daunting. It was us and CVS were the only people open for a few months. We're very lucky because we're so small and we could pivot pretty quickly. So we transitioned to strictly takeout immediately, just to keep our staff safe because that was the number one thing. But as far as Central Street goes, it's, I feel like the sidewalks roll up at 5:30, 6 o'clock at night, and you can park anywhere you want, and there's really no nightlife whatsoever. So that's challenging. So we've actually, we've limited our hours as well. So we open later and we close earlier now, just to keep our staff. We have such a tight knit, small staff, just to keep them, energized and as safe as possible. But it is interesting. We've seen a lot of changes throughout Central Street, and I do not remember as many vacancies as there are right now.
Great, thank you. So what I want to do now, and then we've had kind of a general conversation, and I want to let everybody in the panel feel free to weigh in. But just before we do that, I think that from what we've heard already, it's pretty clear there's no one solution and no one way out to solve the challenges that these businesses are facing and that the town is facing in terms of empty storefronts. But there is one idea that's going for a town meeting at the end of the month. It's called Article 21. There is a sense that this could help revitalize or bring some new energy to the dining scene. And so I wanted to ask Amy Frigulietti, who is the Assistant Executive Director for the town, to just tell us briefly what Article 21 is and what the goal is there. Thanks,
Sure.
Amy.
Thank you, Greg, and thanks for having us. So Article 21 is going to be, it's an article being put forth to town meeting, which will be at the end of April, and it requires, it will be requiring a limited number of seating under 50 to receive an alcohol license. So right now, if you're a restaurant, you have to have above 50 seats in order to get a license. And this would allow our select board to reduce that number for restaurants to be able to offer either a beer and wine license or an all alcohol license. And then it would have to go to the general court, the state legislature, for approval if town meeting approves it. But we've been, like everyone has been saying, we've been seeing a lot of vacancies in town, and we're just trying to find, a solution to be able to fill some of those vacancies. And we thought that this might be helpful in some different business models, in allowing smaller restaurants to occupy these spaces and offer, alcohol with their pairings. We have maybe about 15 vacancies now, and we also have 10 all alcohol licenses and 6 beer and wine licenses available. So, we have spots and we have the licenses available. Now we have to figure out a way to attract the businesses to come and occupy these spaces. So we know that in speaking with some of the people on the panel previously, there is a trend towards smaller restaurants and smaller chefs looking to, or newer chefs looking to occupy maybe smaller spaces and showcase, their skills. So we are hoping that maybe by allowing these smaller spaces to get licenses, they'll want to come to Wellesley and open up. So, there are other things that we've been trying to do among COVID too, with patio seating and allowing different restaurants to change their model a little bit. And this is just another thing where we're hoping that will help, when consumer confidence comes back, we'll be able to maybe have some people have their restaurants outfitted and be able to have these new restaurants opening.
Great. Thank you, Amy. So I want to open it up to the whole panel and really just ask in general, is the idea of making it possible or easier for smaller restaurants to open here, so restaurants with less than 50 seats, does allowing them the ability to have a liquor license open up opportunities for restaurants we may not be seeing right now? Anybody want?
I think it has to be that. I think that's going to be a really important step. I think if you want a larger diversity of restaurants in Wellesley, which I think Wellesley needs, that's going to be a really important step. But along with that is I've looked at restaurants in Wellesley. I kind of would love to have something out here, but there's a lot of hurdles when it comes to Wellesley beyond just that, the size limit with a liquor license. The laws requiring, eating with alcohol, not just being able to have a drink, the number of seats at the bar, things like that are really challenging. Today's restaurant model is not what it was, 10, 20, 30 years ago, where you have, 70, 80 seats, 10 seats at the bar. Like how people dine is very differently than it was years ago. So Wellesley, I think as part of this, larger solution is going to have to evolve with that, allowing more bar seats, allowing people just to have a drink at the bar. I sit in restaurants all the time, and credit to a lot of the restaurants in Wellesley, the staff is well versed on people who aren't used to dining in Wellesley to say, well, you can't just sit here and have a drink. Are you joining us for dinner? Or are you, you need to order something? And it's a little cringeworthy if you're in the industry. The look on people's face when they hear this, they're like, what's going on? Where am I? Along with that, some of those things I think are going to have to be a little more, some of those regulations are going to have to be brought up to kind of what modern day restaurants are going to need to survive. And the rents in Wellesley are, you're charging Boston rents and Wellesley regulations. Those are really things that don't always add up. So, Wellesley definitely provides some challenges beyond just the number of seats to, have a liquor or beer and wine license. So I think a lot of those things are going to need to change for the diversity and to fill up some of those spots.
Those are really good points. I guess the one question though, Jeremy, is if you were looking for to open a restaurant now and you wanted a small intimate restaurant, is having a liquor license a non-starter? Not being able to have a liquor license a non-starter, you would choose somewhere besides Wellesley?
Non-starter. If you can't have a fun little restaurant and be able to sell at least beer and wine, to get people the opportunity to spend a few more dollars, and it just doesn't, you can't make it work. It's really hard to make those numbers work.
Yeah, I agree with Jeremy. Yeah, I mean, you just can't do it. You can't charge enough food. You need the liquor sales in there to get the per head up. And even at that, if the landlords are charging what they're charging, 50 seats is difficult to make a profit, in my opinion. But liquor definitely would help the situation. And I just want to say, for all of our restaurants that stay open, we need to thank our landlords, at least for us, because landlords have had to take a big hit here too.
Thank you.
I think piggybacking on top of what Jeremy said, I don't think people realize the full length of the law with bar seating. And I believe it's 10% of your seats can be bar seats. So if you only have 30 restaurants, 3 bar seats just doesn't really work, and it doesn't make sense. So I think that's for common sense would say that's a bigger hurdle as far, I mean, intent to dine as well, but just percentage of bar seats. Because if you have a small intimate space and you want to maximize your seating, I think bar seating would be definitely a way to go. And getting rid of that or expanding upon that and allowing some of these places to become more modern and a different concept, it would make a huge difference.
So I'm going to ask Jay Spencer if I can. Jay, Needham went through something similar not all that long ago where there were not liquor licenses available for small restaurants. You have a little cafe that has only, what, a dozen seats or so?
Yeah, so we're bustling 1,500 square feet, of which most of that is kitchen space. And so technically we have 25 seats, both indoor and outdoor seating. And we started the process about 2 years ago with the select board on asking for a beer and wine license. And I think the challenge at that time was to allow the government to rethink how Needham could become with a smaller operation having a bigger beer and wine license and what that would mean for the town. The way in which people were interacting with us in our full service restaurant, which was 100 seats, is the way that Needham had traditionally thought about, alcohol licensing. But, it was completely new and foreign, and there were a lot of issues associated with, why would we do this? What would be the benefits? And we had a long conversation about it and what type of demographic it would bring to the town. Needham has always been a destination dining. And, we weren't getting that younger demographic come in, but within our space specifically, we were. And we were thinking about ways to, and working with the town on ways that we could change that. I agree with Jeremy, I agree with Laura that it doesn't stop with this article. You have to look at the entire process, because we had to have a discussion on whether you still needed to bring beer and wine to the table. Well, technically speaking, we had a community table. Why couldn't people take it at the counter? So, there were a lot of discussions that had to happen beyond just saying you can have a beer and wine license for, a smaller establishment. It's about all the other zoning and regulations that go with it in order to allow us to succeed.
So let me just make sure I'm clear though. You run basically a coffee place that was best known for breakfast and maybe grabbing lunch and a sandwich or something. But why did you need beer and wine when you kind of think about that? How did that change your business?
So a lot of the reason why I closed the bistro is that people wanted a lower price point, and the cafe offered that. We would close at 3 or 4 o'clock, and then we would encourage people to kind of go to the bistro for beer, wine, and so forth. They didn't want that concept as it existed, if we talk about 2020, 2021, or even 2019. They wanted a smaller footprint where they could sit for 10 to 15 minutes, have a drink or something like that. Having the beer and wine license allowed us to not only combine both of our concepts, but also to extend our hours and get more revenue. And up until that point, we were kind of making a little bit of money, but we weren't making as much as what we needed to in order to continue us forward. Had COVID hit us during that time, we'd be in a much different financial situation, only doing pastries and coffee at that time. Having a food and beer and wine together gives you a different level of service, and it gives you a different level of profitability, and you need that for survival.
So Angela, Jeremy told us that it's a non-starter if you can't have a liquor license, open a little small restaurant. Is that your sense of it, working with restaurants around the whole region and what's important to them?
Yeah, I mean, ultimately it boils down to profitability, boils down to number of seats, number of turns, and average check. So, number of seats sort of are what they are in these smaller spaces. And, if you don't have those liquor sales, if your concept is approachable, like Jay was just saying, and, your average ticket is, on the lower side, you don't have those sales to make it pencil. You're not going to be able to pay these Wellesley rents. You're not going to be able to pay your employees or even make a sizable profit. It just doesn't work that way. So when you have the ability to sell beer, wine, cocktails, you're going to bolster those sales 25, maybe even up to 50%. And that's where the money's made. That's when you're going to be able to be a successful business and have some staying power in a community.
Great. And Brad, when we were talking the other day, you said you were actually thinking of maybe opening a small cafe as part of your operation. Tell us what this bylaw means to you and whether or not you can do that.
It's an idea we've kicked around for a long time. Just, second generation coming to the business. We've thought about maybe, how can we expand upon our business here? We've been there for so long, and how can we bring a second generation into it? And my brother and I both are there at the same time too. And we, what kind of made sense is just synergy with our business. After we got our wine license, which was another process that, about 7 or 8 years ago, we dealt with the town, that I learned a lot about all these rules and regulations, but we thought about maybe a little like cheese, wine, tapas bar, salumi, charcuterie, things like that. And that would be a great synergy with our business, next door or close by. But it's become a non-starter just because of the regulations, because, a space we'd be interested in that we could afford, a small mom and pop family business can't afford these huge spaces for 50 or 100 seats. And so it was 100 seats, they lowered it to 50, but we'd be interested in something much smaller than that. And then the bar seating and just the regulations. So it's been, we've thought about it. We've talked to some selectmen about it, and they've been responsive, but it's been, there's already hurdles or roadblocks just to even kick that can down the road too far.
Yeah.
And so, obviously we're addressing a lot of those right now, but it's nice to inform everybody exactly what the hurdles are for everybody.
And I want to just one more point or one more question, at least directly about Article 21. Amy, I understand that there's a public hearing Monday night from the select board on this question. And one of the parts that's still unresolved is whether it should be any number of seats inside a restaurant or whether it should go down to 20 or 30 or whatever. Is that still something that we're waiting to find out what that this article might say?
Yes, so I think what we're looking to do is solicit feedback, one from all of you here, because I think that's really helpful to know, what's profitable for you, is it, can you do a restaurant at 20 seats? Can you do a restaurant at 25 seats? Is that something that is manageable and profitable? Or, and then we also want to get feedback from our community and from our residents as to, what their thoughts are on it. So we haven't pulled together the motion yet, but that will be something that is coming, and we're soliciting feedback in order to do that.
Okay, restaurateurs, here's your chance. Tell Amy and the select board members that are in the audience and town meeting members, should there be any number of seats, or should it just be anybody who can make their business work should be able to have a beer and wine license as long as they're following all the right regulations? Anybody want to give Amy some advice in the town?
I'll give her some bad advice. I think, I think one of the things I hear constantly in Wellesley is they don't necessarily want just, bars or places that serve more alcohol than they do food. I think, the only, maybe not the only, but one of the regulations could be a percentage of alcohol is a percentage of total sales. So, which could be checked, when they pay their meals tax, they have to put that in. That could be checked quarterly, annually, and figure out what makes sense for Wellesley. Is it, 60-40, 60% food, 40% beverage? What part of that beverage makes up alcohol sales? What feels comfortable? But I think, Wellesley on a whole has to really move forward with this, because it's easier to operate a small restaurant or small business that want, like this in the surrounding towns than it is in Wellesley. And Wellesley certainly has the resources and should have the diversity of restaurants that some of these other towns do. So I definitely think as long as you can, if you're selling food and alcohol and the percentages work for Wellesley, there's no reason 10 seats, 100 seats, you should be able to get a license.
Great. Anybody else have thought on that?
Yeah, I would agree with that. I would say that you don't want to be overly restrictive in eliminating concepts by setting a seat requirement. It's either under 50 or over 50. Because if you look at where the next level of restaurants are going to come from, it's going to be these smaller independent types where people have an idea, they're going to come up with some funding, and they're going to launch that space. So to be constricted by the number of seats is just not the right parameter to be using.
Great, thank you, Jay. So let's open the conversation up bigger now. We talked about rent, and I'd love to hear more about that and that challenge and some of the other restrictions in town. Tell me, anybody, what your thoughts are about the kinds of other things that you would love to see the town do to help your business grow, and also to help bring other businesses here, and even support some of the small ones that aren't represented here today. Anybody want to take a shot at that?
I mean, I think that, there should, if in Chicago, I have friends who have restaurants, a lot of restaurants in Chicago. If you decide you want to open a restaurant in Chicago, there is a city employee that works directly with people trying to open a restaurant business that helps them navigate all of the city's, permitting applications, that entire process. They are an advocate for that business owner to help them get through all of those things. So, if there was a restaurant person in the town of Wellesley, those people come in and are looking to explore opening in Wellesley, helping them understand the permitting process, all of the regulations and whatever is surrounding, locally what's important, meeting with the health department, meeting with the police force to understand what the police does to enforce liquor laws in that town. I have restaurants in several towns. Usually the chief of police will come in and visit you once a year, say hello, and say, we're going to try to send minors into your restaurant once a year to buy alcohol at the bar, something like that. They are upfront about their process and what it is. So, an individual that is working directly with restaurants to help them navigate all the, opening a restaurant's hard. Having someone help them in Wellesley, help them navigate all those things could be a nice little perk for people coming in from out of town to open. And I do think the trend is the suburbs. I hear a lot of chefs thinking about moving out of the city. There's a little bit of safety feeling in the suburbs that people are, moving out of cities, moving out of denser populated areas, and getting away from the high rents of these, really urban areas and moving out into suburban. So, Wellesley should move along with that trend of all these great chefs and restaurants trying to find these new homes. It'd be nice to see Wellesley, land a few of those.
Yeah, I mean, I can tell you, talking to restaurant owners in Newton and Needham, that they have a lot of Wellesley customers, and I think folks would very much like to be able to have the opportunity to stay in town. But let me ask you this, Laura. You operate 2 businesses here. Are you nervous about more restaurants coming here, or is that good for you, or is it a little bit of both?
I think it's a little bit of both for us. I think Wellesley's got too many vacancies, and we need retail to come back. We need little boutique restaurants to come back. I loved, Brad's idea of doing a cheese shop with a little wine bar and Frigulietti. I think that would be lovely. I think things like that are needed. Just to sort of create that intimacy that Wellesley had, when I grew up in town and all the stores were busy and it was really a great destination. I am concerned though. We used to have a restaurant in Newton, and when we got there were 3 restaurants. And by the time we left, there was, I think, 12 restaurants, and they were continuing to add some. So I think at some point there's a line where it's like, okay, now you're over restauranted and not, no one can survive well then. No one's really going to kind of, kill it and be able to stay, and sort of have that longevity that the town likes and landlords like. So I do think we need more, but I don't think we need 30 more restaurants. I think, whatever the town sees is right. I know other towns, because I've got businesses in other towns, they sort of look at the mix of what's in town, whether it's ethnic food or, high end or lower end. So I think all those things can be addressed easily. I do think Wellesley has incredibly high rents. And I think really, I think any restaurant business restaurateur will tell you that, 90% of your success is even before you even open the doors. It's just what makes sense on paper, and, the rents that people are charging. And I think now we should all really look at our rents again, because, a lot of these centers don't have the traffic that they used to. And I signed rents on, really busy stuff, and where the tavern is, there's a lot of black holes, there's a lot of black eyes. So I think we'll get there, but I think it's just patience and everybody working together.
So let's talk a little bit about rent. And we do have a question from Patty, who says specifically, how can small business owners get past the huge rent that are all over town? And what do we do about rent? Is there a way to get landlords to rethink deals or how they structure deals, Angela?
Yeah, I mean, I think, having this article get passed is really going to unlock some of those opportunities and lower those barriers to make coming into Wellesley a little bit more approachable and make it start to pencil. We're seeing a huge trend of landlords really getting creative with new rent structures. Some of them revisiting existing leases that they have with their tenants and restructuring those, and really creating more of a partnership and really diving into, sales volumes and how can we grow those and how can we protect, the downside of the tenant, but also have the landlord share in the upside. So we're seeing, a lot of these landlords get more creative. I think we still have a ways to go, but I think, as we look at Wellesley and, the goal to make the downtown vibrant and dynamic and have people visit there and spend time and have that rising tide effect with all the tenants there and attract more, these landlords are gonna have to face that and see if they can get creative with really creating that partnership.
Anybody else on that, on the issue of rent or thoughts about it? Well, let me first invite anybody who has a question to submit it in the Q&A. And one of the things I've been wondering about as you all think about reopening or think about opening in Wellesley is talent is always a problem. Hiring is always a problem. It was a problem before the pandemic for restaurants to find people. It can be particularly hard in a community where you can't necessarily, your hourly wage workers or restaurant workers can't afford to live, and there's not the right housing, and transportation is difficult. Tell me now what the talent pool is like, how as you're starting to ramp up and rehire in your restaurants and thinking about the spring, are you gonna be able to find people to work in your restaurants?
I think the issue right now is even more difficult than it was before. You would expect that with the number of people that have been laid off, that the labor pool would be very rich. But there's a lot of health concerns. There's a lot of availability. A lot of people have left the career for other opportunities. We've been looking for people, and it's just incredibly difficult. You also have to couple that with transportation cuts because some of the people that we normally employ come from Boston, and with the bus cuts, the rail cuts and things like that, it's even more difficult. So we're finding ourselves in a situation where not only do you have to pay more for talent, you also have to be careful on how you get in that talent, because it may not be the talent that you need that's able to adapt and to adjust to the things that are necessary for the day.
Yeah. Laura, what about you as you're trying to bring people back to the cottage to become a full service restaurant again and open the tavern for the first time?
Yeah, we were lucky. We got a lot of the cottage staff back. So that was good. We got, I would say, about half of the staff back for the tavern. We've had to hire a lot more people in the kitchen, but going back to Jay's point, a lot of it is just how people are going to get to you. Luckily, Wellesley does have a train that comes to it, and so that's helpful. But it's definitely a concern, as he said, and I agree. People are concerned about health issues. And then, for a long time, a lot of us are complaining or mentioning that, we were paying people to stay home. And that really hurt for a while too. So I think when some of the extra subsidies, dwindle out, maybe more people want to come back to work. But we got a lot of applications in the beginning, but we're getting less and less right now. And we still are trying to hire up. We're a little busier than we thought. So we need more staff, and it is definitely a challenge. We're asking everybody we know who has kids, who has college kids that want to come back and help out. So, but you know what? The other side of it is, it's a nice problem to have right now. And it's been a long time. It's been a year that, I've been facing these problems. The problems that we've all been facing have been very different for the last year. So I'm glad I have these problems.
Right. Anybody else on that? So we've got about maybe 10 minutes left, and I wanted to just open up again in general. I know, Jeremy, early on, you mentioned a number of other kind of restrictive things that you think the towns needs to think about. I'd love to review or discuss those things. So beyond Article 21, which I'm getting people realizes it discusses a first step, an important first step, what else really can help build a vibrant restaurant scene, which builds foot traffic, which helps our retail stores, which helps all our other businesses, fills in those empty storefronts. Where are the ways that you would love to see the town rise up and help you all to help the entire town?
Well, I think the town's been great. And I think some of these things they're attempting to do really signal that the town is trying to move in a more modern direction. I think that Wellesley's a great community. It has a ton of amenities in and around the town. And that's why people love to live here. There's, train stops, public space, all those things. And I think, we're, as people want to backfill with restaurants. And I think that, with the town the way it is and all that we have available to us, great restaurants should be part of that, part of that mix. I think, when people talk about landlords and rents, yeah, the rents are really high. And the only way that the landlords, they have financial partners and institutions they're responsible to, that, they have to pay mortgages. So they're going to have to do what's best for them. I think the only way you're going to see an adjustment is the longer those spaces stay empty. And I think they're going to come to the realization that it just makes it harder to get quality clients, quality tenants in these spaces that really try to make the math work. For me, mostly what I do is raw bars and sell a lot of beer and wine and, a cocktail program. And people love to sit at the bar. The more bar seating, the better. I mean, so for us, like if, the romantic version is you're sitting at the bar eating oysters, drinking a great glass of wine, having this great experience, that doesn't always translate to more tables. Sometimes that translates to more bar seats. So how we make the math work for us, for Wellesley, for what we've looked at, it doesn't work. And to get long-term quality tenants that are going to pay rent for 10 plus years, live the life of the lease, you need good tenants. And to have good tenants, you have to have fair, reasonable real estate expectations on both sides, for the landlord and for the tenant. So, the only way to fill those spaces are to lower rents. And if they don't lower the rents, those spaces are going to stay empty. And then, you see it that the diversity of tenants might change, but it might not be exactly what you want, because, you're going from the top tier operators you're trying to get, and you just keep clicking down until you get the space filled with those who are willing to pay what you want for rent. So long term, the only way to fill them is to work with a good tenant and have a good landlord tenant relation.
And can you or someone clarify, what is the rule right now in terms of how much food you need to order in order to be served with alcohol? What is that?
I don't know what it is in Wellesley. I'm sure somebody else
can. With that, or?
I can jump in. So what, it's a little bit vague. At times they say you have to have a meal, but a meal for me might be different than like a meal for Jay or Jeremy, where, I'm happy with, some bread and a bowl of soup, but, for somebody else that might not be enough. So it's a little vague at times. It can't just be sort of like a bowl of popcorn in front of somebody. I mean, I think everybody knows that you need to have some sort of something substantive in front of you. And at times it gets difficult because at times, we've been told you need to have, people really need to be eating bigger meals at the bar. And that's, that's well and good, but not everybody it can eat as much as everybody else. So at times it gets a little bit vague. I'd like to see Wellesley sort of look at that and try to come up with, okay, the restaurant just needs to offer food. We have restaurants in other areas, and as long as we offer food, we can easily control the amount of alcohol somebody's having. I don't think anybody wants to see sort of, college type bars in Wellesley. But I think there's definitely more space for people having a drink and either a quick nibble and going to the next place, or even just having a quick glass of wine, meeting a friend. So I think the town needs to look at that. If the town's going to stay with, this 10% of bar seating to restaurant seating, if somebody has, a 50-seat restaurant, having 5 bar seats isn't helping them. You just can't do it on that. You need more. And as Jeremy says, and we agree, I mean, right now the party's at the bar, and it's not that people are there partying, but it's where everybody wants to sit. They want to meet their neighbor next to them. You know, they want to see friends at the bar. And right now in this climate, you know, I wish I could have, you know, 5 and 10 more bar seats in each of my restaurants. I think that would just be that much more fun.
Right, and I think especially as people come back, they are going to want to have that interaction. Somebody asked about really how much, we've been talking a lot about how expensive it is, but is there a way to quantify that? I mean, telling a dollar amount may not help, but what percentage of your income goes to rent in a restaurant in Wellesley? What might it be, or what's the best way to explain to people who don't know what the rent challenge is? Anybody want to help explain that to folks who don't?
Well, for us, we try to keep our occupancy somewhere between 8 and 10%. So we have to look at the rent, and then there's CAMs and taxes on top of that. So we sort of, you know, from there, we're like, okay, if that's the rent, what do we have to, you know, what are the sales, you know, the top line sales to met that be somewhere between 8 and 10%. And I think there's definitely ways that landlords can be creative in terms of maybe smaller base rents, and then there's, you know, higher percentage rents. I think there's different ways to, you know, to go about doing it. So for us, that's what we try to operate on, 8 to 10%. Some months it is, some months it isn't, but it all sort of works out in the end.
So basically 8 to 10% of your revenue goes towards your physical rent before you're paying for anything else. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah.
And Angela, can you help us maybe understand this a little better, what restaurants need and what owners need, and also explain what this percentage rent idea is?
Sure, yeah. So Laura sort of touched on it, but you know, you have your base rent, and then you have your taxes and common area maintenance additions onto that. So you have this gross rent number. So what you're paying annually should equate to, you know, between 8 or 10, ideally closer to 8% of what you're going to be making for that year. So it's sort of a math equation. And what we do when we're trying to put these deals together is work with the landlords and sort of work backwards into what the rent should be. The idea of the percentage rent is ideally a lower base rent. And then based on, you know, what that is and what you're anticipating your profit is going to be, or your overall revenue, you'll give a percentage over a break point, which is set. A percentage of those sales goes back to the landlord to add on top of your rent. So the intent behind that is that, you know, if you're starting to open up and you're ramping up business and it's early on in your lease term, you know, that's going to protect your downside. If you don't hit that break point, you know, you're still just paying this lower base rent. But, you know, a couple of years down, or if you knock it out of the park in year one and you're, you know, well above this break point, then you're going to be able to share a percentage of that with the landlord to go towards the rent, because you're sharing in the upside of your profitability.
So I think that also applies to, if, let's say, oh, maybe there's a pandemic and business is off for a while. If you're on a percentage rent program, you actually have an opportunity to endure the year better than if you're just owing a straight amount, obviously, right? Yeah. So other thoughts, anybody, about rent or what it needs to be? All right, well, I would say that we've covered a lot of territory. If there's any last comments or thoughts from anybody, we'd love to do that. Otherwise, we can wrap it up. I do see there's actually a couple of questions that just come in. Validated parking, and I guess we have a suggestion here from someone about the idea of also being able to promote the dining scene and things here in Wellesley. So just wanted to mention that. But any last thoughts for anybody? If not, I want to thank everybody for being here today and encourage folks, especially town meeting members, to think seriously about what you heard today, and particularly Article 21, which I think we all agree here would be a really useful first step to helping the town, helping restaurant owners, helping bring more vitality to the town, and even helping the tax base and fill those empty storefronts. So thank you all for being here. Thanks everybody for watching. Thanks to Needham Bank and Newton Wellesley Hospital for sponsoring this program. And we will see you again next time. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Take care. Yeah, bye.